Welcome to lesson 4.3, where we'll learn to add users and groups to the system. First, let's talk about the etc passwd file. This file is used at the time of login, as well as additional times during the use of the system, to determine what the user ID is of the logged in user, what that user's home directory is, and additional meta information about that user account. We'll look at the password file in detail, but the fields are as follows. The login name, so this is the name you type at the login prompt, a blank password or an X for the password as a placeholder. The actual password is stored in a different file called etc shadow. We have a user ID field, which is a numeric ID identifying the user and is used to map a username to a user account. A group ID field, which identifies what your primary group is. The GCOS information, which is a free-form text field where you can type information about the user, for instance, their real name or their office information or whatever you wanted to put in that field. The password file specifies the user's home directory, which is by default under /home on most Linux distributions. And finally, the login shell. By default, bash is the shell for most Linux systems. There's, of course, CSH and TCSH and ZSH and many other shells. By default, when you add a user account, you'll be adding an account with the bash shell. The group file under /etc/group lists all of the groups on the system and their members. There are several fields in the group file as well. The group's name, a group password placeholder, which is basically unused and not used by any application anymore, a GID number, the group identifier, and then a comma-separated list of all of the members of that group. So let's take a look at some examples. Let's start by adding a user account to the system. The first thing I can do is type which user add to show me where the user add command is in my path, if it's in my path at all. We can see that it's under user sbin user add. There's also an alias add user. I can list these files so we can see what they look like. In this case, the add user command is simply a symbolic link to the user add command. So that means they're exactly the same command. To add a user, it's very simple. I can simply type user add and a username, for instance, live lesson, to add the live lesson user account. At this point, that account exists, but it has no password. I can view the account if I search for live lesson in the etc passwd file. Here we can see the user live lesson. We can see all the fields I discussed in the slide a moment ago. The user account is live lesson. The password placeholder is simply an X. This is not an actual password, of course. We can see the user ID field, which is 1002. We can see the group ID field, which is also 1002. Groups are added with the same name as the user account by default. So when I typed user add live lesson, it created the user account live lesson as well as a group live lesson, which you can see in the etc group file. We can see that the group ID is 1002, which matches to the user account group identifier field. We have a blank field. We can see two colons next to each other indicating that the GCOS information is blank. We have /home/live lesson as the live lesson user's home directory. And at the end, we have /bin/bash, which is that user's shell. So let's take a look at the live lesson and bwhaley account in the etc shadow file, which is where the actual values for the passwords are stored. I can type, using our grep experience, I can type egrep, caret to search at the beginning of the line, and I can use a pipe to say either live lesson or bwhaley, and I specify the file to search in. So we see two username matches here out of the etc shadow file. We see the bwhaley account and the live lesson account. You see the colon, and then you see a hashed value for the password. So this is the bwhaley account's hashed password. We see some additional identifying information. Notice that in this example, the live lesson user's password is simply exclamation, exclamation, or bang, bang, this indicates that the password is currently not set. There's no password for the live lesson user. So we need to go ahead and set it. We can type passwd live lesson. And I can give it some password, anything I want. I typed a very simple one, so the system warned me that it's based on a dictionary word. It's not a very complex password. And now if I search for live lesson again in Etsy Shadow, we can see that there's now a password value set. So this user account could now log into the system via one of the methods we just discussed and use the password to log in. So now let's back as our Vagrant user account. We are no longer root. I've logged out with Control-D. I can check out the live lesson account directory. cd/home. I can ls to see all of the user accounts. In this case, there are only 3, bwhaley, live lesson, and Vagrant. And if I try to switch to the live lesson directory, it says permission denied, which is exactly what you want, of course. You wouldn't want one user account to easily access the files of another user account. We can see that if we do a long listing, ls-l of the directory, live lesson directory, in this case D gives you a directory listing. We can see that the directory is owned by the user live lesson and the group live lesson. So how could I see this directory if I was an administrator and I really needed to get in and look at it? Well, I can type sudo su- as we learned how to switch between users, and I can just go ahead and change to that user account as the root account. I can switch into that user's directory, and I can explore. The root account has global permissions across the system. It can see any file, make any changes that it needs to. The root account needs to be very carefully protected as a result. We can also go ahead and add a group account. I can type group add admins. Now if I search for the admins group in the Etsy group file, I can see that it exists, but notice at the end there is no users currently in this group. So I need to go ahead and add some users. I can do that with the vi-gr command. This stands for vi group, or we use the vi editor, which we learned about previously, to edit the group file. So I can see all of the different groups on the system here. And if I go to the end, I used Shift-G and VI to go to the end of the file, and I can see the admins group that we just added. We can see that it has a group ID of 1003. And I can go ahead and add some users to it. I might add Vagrant and Live Lesson and bwhaley. Type escape, and I'll quit with :WQ to save the group file. Okay, so now the group file has been modified. I did that, all that work as the root account, so I'm going to log out of the root account back to my Vagrant account. If I type ID, it shows me, the Vagrant user, in the Vagrant group as well as the wheel group, which is added automatically by default as a privileged group. So notice that we just edited the group file and we added the Vagrant user to the admins group, but we don't see that in our group list. That's because changes to groups do not take effect until you next log into the system. So I'm going to log out using Control-D. Now I'm back on my own laptop system. I'm going to go ahead and use SSH, Vagrant SSH, to log back into my CentOS box. Now I'm logged in, and if I type the ID command, we can see that I have the admins group added, as expected. Just as easy to delete a group, I'll do it as the Vagrant account using the sudo command. We can use sudo to perform an action as root, user del live lesson. Now the live lesson group has been removed. However, if I list the home directory, I can see that the files for live lesson have not been removed. I can search for the live lesson user in Etsy passwd. It's gone, but the directory still exists. So by default, the user del command does not delete the user's directory in case there was any valuable files in there. That's all there is to adding and removing users on a Linux system.